Now that we've looked at content generation and visitor types, I want to show you the other way that we have set up for you to personalize your content, and that's with rules. So on the Swaptify side, we have a section for rules. The way that these work, I'm going to delete this one so that we can build this from scratch. The way that rules work is the intention for rules is to be more one-off and transient than visitor types. So the idea behind visitor types is you identify based on behavior what type of customer or prospect is browsing through your website, and then modify all the areas on the site that are applicable to that visitor type. With rules, though, the idea is that they don't necessarily translate from page to page, because within one single page view, the rule is either met or not met, and the swaps that are associated with that rule change or don't change based on the rule for that particular page visit. Now, you can do some things within that rule, like you could set a visitor type when that rule is engaged by calling the visitor type script with the Swaptify API within the content that you pull up from that rule, which is what we're going to do today. So let's take a look at a semi-complex use case to create this rule. So let's imagine that we are running Google Ads for this pet store that we're building, and we're running paid search ads with a slew of different keyword targets. And let's imagine that we want to change this headline. Right now it's getting pulled in by visitor type to say this is a cat because the visitor type has been set. But let's imagine that when someone comes from a Google ad, we want to recognize the keyword that was matched to their original Google search, and then put that keyword, not what they actually searched, but the keyword that it matched from your set of key phrases for targeting. You want to put that key phrase as the title. So say, let's use, for example, that someone's going to search for affordable cat toys. You could say, you could turn this title to browse affordable cat toys, and then you could dynamically change this button to run a search on the e-commerce site for the term cat toys. Okay, so let's see how we would build this out. We would start with adding a new swap into our current headline. So let's go with the one that's active now is this method 2. The second one we covered in the content generation tutorial. And then we're going to add a new swap for Google Ads. We'll call it dynamic. Make sure it's active. And let's put in a placeholder for the headline that will generate dynamically. We'll say div class equals, let's say dynamic heading. And then we're going to put together a script. For now, to test the rule, let's just do an alert. Now that we have the swap, we can build the rule. So over here on Swaptify, we're going to create a new rule. We'll call this Google Ads Dynamic. Let's say, yeah, I guess it is the banner because we're going to do the button as well. Let's say we're going to have to meet all the conditions. Here's where we get into the content selection. So first I have to go make sure that our swap is activated. Select it. This is the, if you want to have multiple swaps that swap randomly when a rule is engaged. You can do that. You can also pick from every segment on your site. So like, let's say we had, these are all different methods of doing the hero swapping, but if we had like, you know, customized messages that are on CTA pods or on contact pages or anything like that, once one rule passes, you could update all the content in any segment to be, swapped in when that rule is passed. For now, what I want to do is when this rule is passed, I only want it to show this one swap. If I pick two, it would swap randomly, and then I could do content testing about which piece of content performs better when that rule passes. For now, I just want to engage this swap when the rule is triggered. So let's go through here and we'll start adding our rule conditions. I'm going to have the logic say to meet all conditions, and then add one. And I'm going to go down here to the URL parameters section. So I'm going to say that I'll identify when someone's coming from Google Ads with a UTM source of Google. That can match exactly. Oops, I needed to add one more. We also want to add, so we have all conditions. So if we add another condition, the logic is and instead of or. So and a parameter of UTM medium of CPC. And these would be we would be using on the Google ad side, we would be using their template system to put in, we could hard code in source and medium so that they never change. And then we could do UTM term, which I'm not going to add to the rule because I want it to trigger regardless of what the term is set. But we could put in the UTM term and then dynamically add their template for inserting the keyword that was matched. And then that is how we could, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's just start here. Here's our rule. The big thing to note here is that rules, when they match, override visitor types. Because they're meant to be more transient and one-off, the idea is that if you have constructed your personalization logic in a way where there are visitor types and rules, because rules are meant to be more transient, they are meant to override the visitor type. So if you don't want that behavior to happen, then you need to create personalization segmentation where these concepts of visitor types versus rules don't overlap, which is possible. In this case, I'm doing them all in one. And the internal logic behind what I'm constructing is saying, if I know the visitor type, go for this personalized headline. But if I recognize that someone came from Google Ads, my preference is for it to create this dynamic headline rather than defaulting either to their known visitor type or to the default content, which is the ultimate fallback. Because we can imagine that if someone's coming from a Google ad, even if we know that they are a cat lover, the specific keyword match that they searched for on Google ad is going to have higher relevance than a generic message that we could put in front of them simply by knowing that they were a cat lover. There's going to be more context into the Google ads match. So this is the idea behind why rules take precedence over visitor types. So let's test this one out. We've got the rule, it's on. We've got the swap, it's set to active. So as long as I set everything up correctly, when I hit refresh on this page, we should see the alert and we should see an empty headline because we have put in just a blank placeholder that we're going to engage with via a script. So let's cross our fingers, hope I set it up right, and take a look. Perfect. So we've got our script that got loaded in here. Our heading is blank with our placeholder. which if we dial in, we should be able to see where we're getting that. So there, this is a swap coming from Swaptify. So here's our empty area where we're going to inject our dynamic header. This is our script firing. So part 1 is complete. We got the rule firing, and it's taking precedence over the visitor type. Next, we have to construct our script. I'm not going to make you sit and watch while I do that, but I will just cut here, and we'll come right back and walk through the logic of the script that I built. So we've got the script written, and I want to walk you through it. I want to walk you through how it works. So I'll expand this just so we can kind of take a look. So here's essentially what we are doing when we trigger the rule. This swap will take precedence over our visitor type swaps, and I'll show you that actually working when we get to the front end testing. But essentially what we're doing here is we're looking in the URL and we're getting the term from UTM term. In our Google Ads, we would send the dynamic Google Ads keyword match into the template where we have like UTM term equals and then that keyword match. And then we're going to manipulate this a little bit just to clean it up so that we can inject it into our page in the right spot. So right now, in this part of the code, we're looking for it. We're turning it into lowercase. I can't remember if Google Ads does that implicitly or if you have like uppercase characters in your keyword, whether it would match the case when it constructs the URL from their template system. So just to be 100% sure, I did lowercase, and the reason that we want it to be able to match case is for some of these rules that we're going to have later. For the content changing, what we are doing here is we're looking for this section that we have up here in the HTML called the class of dynamic heading, and we're changing the interior text on that dynamic heading to browse plus the term from Google that we matched with a space in there. So you'll see how that outputs. And then I'm also targeting the button that we have in this section. I mean, this is actually too broad of a rule. You wouldn't use this in real life because this would target every element or button on the page. You'd want it to be a little more tightly scoped to your banner, but just for the sake of demonstration, I'm just swapping this one, and we're putting in a URL that says to perform a search. This is a WordPress site, so we have $s equals, so that's the search, and then we're encoding the dynamic header that we pulled out from the URL and putting it into the search term, so that when we have browse products on that button, it will automatically click through to a search for the products that match the query that matched the original Google Ads intention. It's kind of cool. One other thing that we're doing, and you could go much deeper than this, but I'm just doing 2 examples. This is how I'm now saying that, okay, regardless of what visitor type may have been set on this user's session or cookie before, if they've come from a Google ad that matched a particular keyword, let's say they Googled affordable cat toys, and our keyword that we had put into paid search was cat toys. It would match cat toys on the Google side. That would get spit into the URL. So we'd have cat toys as the UTM term. We now want to say if the word cat is in their Google search, we're going to override any previous visitor type setting, and we're going to set the visitor type. That's what this is doing here. We're setting the visitor type to the cat one, and I got that from the visitor type section right here. So that's for cats, and then we do it again for dogs. And like I said, you could go deeper with that and do as many visitor type settings as you want. So this other stuff, though, is handling the image selection on the page. So right now we have it so that this image here is getting constructed based on when the visitor type is set. We're putting a body tag, a Swaptify body class, and then using CSS to change this background image. So I'm just doing that manually by when we recognize that the Google search included a term that was related to cat, we're going to remove any of the previous Swaptify body classes by saying, like, if a class has Swaptify in it, get rid of it, and then add the class for Swaptify cat lovers, and then set the visitor type to cat lovers so that all future pages will apply that same visitor type. Well, we're basically, like, on the page that we're in, forcing the visitor type to apply right away rather than waiting until the next page view. And then same exact rule here, but for dogs rather than cats. And so we have this ready. Now let's go test it and hope everything works as we would expect. So first, let's test without any of the Google Ads terms, right? So this is what our Google Ads URL would look like. We have UTM source Google, UTM medium CPC. That's what triggers our rule, remember? And then we have UTM term, which isn't part of our rule, but it's part of our dynamic content. So we have this that should turn into this. Spoiler alert, it does. I already tested it before I recorded, but let's get rid of it and see what happens when it's not on there. So it looks like we're triggering the cat content, right? Now let's go to the dogs page. This turns us into a dog lover. We go back to the home page. This should now show us dog content. If we constructed our injected personalization script, we know that the rule works. So now we just have to test that our script works. So if everything works as expected, when I hit enter, this title should now say browse cat toys. And the image should also dynamically change to the cat. And it should stay that way on subsequent views because we've now changed the visitor type from dogs to cats. Let's test. Oops. Browse cat toys. We got the cat image. Now, are we still a cat person? Let's get this out so that we don't trigger the rule. If we have changed from, if the API correctly changed us from a dog lover to a cat lover, going back to the home page or refreshing without triggering the rule should stay as a cat lover. But not with our rule headline. Remember, this is with our cat lover headline, so that's our fallback. So everything does work as expected. We could test one more version of this by saying that the UTM term is, let's say, instead of cat toys, let's look for dog treats. Now we get the dog image, browse for dog treats, and when we click on browse products, we're going to go to a search results page. Now this website hasn't been built with all the products or whatever, but it does a search on the WordPress database for dog treats. So this is one, I think, probably pretty strong use case for Swaptify rules. Pretty simple to set up from the rule perspective, and the real power comes in when you, with all of the things you can do with custom scripts related to when these rules get triggered and what you can inject into the page from the shortcode builder or from your dynamic swaps. So I'm sure that you'll come up with plenty of ideas for how you can interact between rules and visitor types, and there's some future development on the horizon to make commingling those concepts a little bit more robust. But for now, essentially, you can do whatever you need to. And with your Swaptify agency, if you've taken the step of hiring a Swaptify expert agency to help you with any of this stuff, between the ability to inject custom scripts into the page and the rules and visitor types cookie and the content testing that Swaptify can do from its event tracking side, you can essentially do any type of content personalization that you could come up with, that you could think of. So I mentioned event tracking. That's what we're going to look at next, because like now that we're doing all of this content personalization and swapping, we need to figure out what's working. And so building event tracking into content management and personalization is what's going to marry these things together and really start adding to the value proposition of how Swaptify can lift the conversions for your business.